We hope you enjoy listening to the historic gathering of the Willaura community, a 2-day event recorded in 2015 called The Yarn. Listeners are to be advised that these recordings contain voices and images of family members, community and friends who have died.
I'd like to make this is a general comment, in that there'll be every one of us here enjoyed the life we lived here with the freedom that we had compared with the non-freedom, or there's another word probably, of what school children have got now. I mean, we either rode a horse, a bike, or skidded to school any other means. Nowadays, so many children have got to be mollycoddled, they've got to be taken to school by mum or dad or some other means because of the environment, and I guess it happens out here in the country exactly the same as in the city. To me, that's one of the biggest changes that I can see has happened in what you remarked about us here, and nowadays, and probably on in the future, is that break in freedom. It's not there. Everybody is now super fed by either some electronic entertainment, whereas we entertained ourselves, and that might have been going home from school, whatever you did. You either rode a bike, played footy on the way home or whatever. That's a very big social change from this strata of people to the next lot. And God help them for the down the track, you know, how they're going to be looked after. Because school might be at home, mightn't it? Because everybody seems to be so mollycoddled and careful about who's who and what's what.
And I think that those reflections are really valid in this forum as well, like how seeing those changes and your concerns around those changes and how that might look for the future generations.
I really think we've been a very, very lucky town that we had 2 doctors in a hospital in a small town like this, and 2 doctors that really cared about us. They came to our homes when we were sick. As Jeff was talking about the freedom, we all made our own fun. Of course, we had 1 million rabbits to go out and dig up, but we were allowed to do all those things. Today, the kids today are not allowed to do a lot of the things that we got away with. Well, there was no harm in what we did. And Graham, remember, that's all we did, wasn't it? And ride the bikes out 5Ks, load up with rabbits. Sure enough, the heads would get jammed in the spokes and over you would go. Yeah, and the manic and all. And we were just so very, very lucky to grow up in a town like Willaura. And we can all of us can look back on wonderful times. Sort of, most of us here go back to the old hall. Then we moved into this one. And look now, hardly ever used. And I just personally can't see how things can change much. And every rural town you drive through now is the same, and it's very sad.
Yeah, the bit about the 2 doctors, I know what a lot of you knew, but Weary Dunlop used to come up here and operate before Hanscom come, and Weary used to come up here, and I can tell a little story about Quinty Walker. He worked for Johnny's grandfather. Weary put his Daimler in down the shop down here to get service, and Quinty undone the top to have a look to see whether there was any brake fluid in it, and it was a little bit down, so he got a tin of brake fluid and decided to tip this brake fluid straight in out of the tin. It all went all over the mud yard, lifted all the paint off, and his grandfather had to pay for Callum Faulkner's in Melbourne to respray it. I remember that. Yeah. But no, I had a good childhood here. We done it pretty tough, but caught rabbits, milked cows. But when I look back on it, they were the good days, really. Never ever had any money. I remember when Mum left, if we didn't have any money to get something to eat, to live, we used to go over to the Church of England minister used to give us a feed. So, yeah. That was Harry Lister. Another thing too, Betty and I were married over here, in 1956, and a fortnight after Malcolm Fraser was married in the same church.
Good on you, Harry. That's why you're so famous.
Yeah, that's right.
John Walter, I'm not sure what the question was actually. Just recollections? Yeah. Just talking around, you know, you almost think like you're making a story up when you think of the main street being just chock-a-block full of cars and not being able to park anywhere, and especially a Friday afternoon. As I said before, my childhood sort of revolved around the garage, and that wasn't a burden because there was always so much action down there. New machinery, it seemed to be coming and going. I remember being really snotty with Alec McDonald one year because they'd sold 13 585 headers and we'd only sold 12 A81s, I think they were. But that, you know, to think of selling a couple of dozen headers in this town, that's just one piece of machinery, you know, it was happening. And yeah, just but good childhood. You'd ride your bike anywhere, playing with your mates at tea time. Your mother or father would yell out when it was time to come home, that type of thing. I don't know whether I can think of. We didn't get married. We got married in '75, and I know you could buy, even in '75, you could just about buy anything in town. We had HM&O TV, was it, Harry? Yeah, you could go down and buy a TV or a toaster or something like that. You could pay your power bill at the SEC, your phone bill at the post office. Yeah, there was just nothing you couldn't get or get serviced in town. Thanks.
Well, I'm his brother. Every time someone says something, I think of something that's related to it. And when Mr. Gallett was talking about the grain merchants this morning, I think the third one he sort of vaguely hinted at was probably our grandfather, William Walter. He had an intense love relationship with Gus Mithke and Miss Grano. When grandfather was angry, he used to kind of have a bit of a spit. And just the mention of either of those names would produce the saliva. Anyway, then going back to the story of the Daimler, when the Daimler had to be taken from here to down to Callows or wherever, Dad had to drive it down. And he came across some sort of a roadblock or roadworks or something somewhere. And of course the Daimler had all the doctor's insignia and stuff on it. And so when he came to the roadblock, they just we went down the window and they said, "Oh, Sir Edward, just drive on through." His dad was Edward, of course, and that was a story he loved to tell. Then quickly going back to wheat and the bulk wheat, most of you probably remember the first, when we carted wheat to the silo, you had to pitch it off the side of the truck into that bin on the side there. Then when bulk wheat first came in, it was a kind of a interim business, I guess. We used to load bags onto the bag loader into the bulk bin, which seemed a bit silly now, but that's the way it was. And one of my jobs was to be up on the top of the bulk bin, taking the bags off as they came up and emptied. You had to flick the bags off and throw them on the ground. And Uncle Alec was down the bottom, of course, loading the bags. So that was the sort of a funny interim period between bags and bulk, and that's the way that was. I don't want to take up too much time, but Dad and Uncle Alec, of course, during the Depression, Grandfather had this great idea he was going to grow tobacco up on the mount, and that was the perfect time to do it. Of course, and they went broke and they had to start cutting wood up there, and Basil Mithke used to go up and cart the logs or the wood down to the town. They figured Basil was making the most out of all that, so they better buy an old truck. They bought this old Bedford, and they said they never made a buck while they had a Bedford, but eventually they bought an International, and that was the beginning of the good times. So there you go. Anyway, I think that'll do. There's a bit more I can talk about later on about carting the poles for the SEC lines and various things like that, but perhaps they can wait till...
Getting back to the security of things in our day, I can remember riding my bike down to Spittles to get on the bus, which was, I don't know, a couple of miles from home in those days, and I was only 5, I think, when I started doing that, and traffic wasn't an issue, and and then home again. That was in some pretty cool mornings and wet times. The other thing I can remember is Graham's father used to drive one of the school buses, and across where Jeff Ford lives was water from bridge to bridge. We quite often had to go through that when it was floods. And
Thanks, Peter. Jeff Spittle. Look, I think it's pretty well been, a lot of it's been covered as far as the school side of it is concerned. But again, look, I think I'm just turned 70. I think my life, like most of you here, this is probably going to be the best generation that's probably lived. I think it's going to get harder, much harder for our grandchildren. All the rules and regulations and getting jobs and expenses. I think you probably all agree with me. We're the lucky generation.
I suppose. All right, I'm John Higgins. So I've come up here today, your invitation. So I suppose on this side of it, my best recollections of Willaura is the time I spent in the Urban Fire Brigade, the running team, and the success we had with that. And so I really enjoyed that. I was the hydrant man in the team, Jimmy Gordon coaching and following on from what was already... Have you already done the Fire Brigade? So I really enjoyed my time in the Urban Fire Brigade. Following on, we got Graham McGuinness and Frank Byron here that were successful in the 60s and or late 50s. So Martin Gullett was the ladder man. He got first, second and third at the state demo. I got third in the hydrant race twice, and in 1 year when Martin won the ladder race and I got third in the hydrant race. So the ladder of 5, you thought we should have won the 5, but we didn't. We only came second. Doug Slattery used to always be amazed at that. There's a DVD down at the fire station of running if you want that. So the fire brigade. Another good thing I was involved in was the Young Farmer movement. Have you already talked about that? What was it? Well, I suppose the fire brigade, the running teams were originally established in the 1900s, were they, fellas? With a big, which in those days, the hoses on reels was sort of like horse carts, or on, the local men would just take the reel to a fire. So it was running in the Urban Fire Brigade or getting involved in the fire brigade was a way of getting people into the fire brigade and showing an interest. And then by being there, you would understand how the hoses and how hydrants and water and pressure and all that sort of thing work. So that was the initial part of it, of doing it. And then so the thrill of competition was the way to keep people interested. And so there was competitions of, from where you could do one-man events, one-man hydrant race, ladder race, marshals, or 2 men up to 8-man events. And Willaura had a very successful side right through. And Jimmy Gordon was sort of legendary coach. As such, we had the tactics worked out, and we were because of things one you had to be able to run, but you had to do. It was one of those sports where actually you need the team, but you all had to do your bit in sequence before the next person could do theirs. So it was a great thing to be involved in. And then the other thing I was going to talk about was the Young Farmer movement. So I suppose I enjoyed my time in that. When was that established, Peter? So I was involved in the 70s, I suppose, and there was a social movement sort of called Young Farmers that had a club in Willaura. There was another one at Lake Bolac, and sort of other small towns had them. And so, it's sort of a social movement and a bit of farming, and people learned how to meeting format and took on responsibility you took your turn at being president and whatever ranks you were involved in. And so it was from 18 to 25, which was a good age group to be involved in. So between Fire Brigade and Young Farmers, I suppose I got to see most of the state, because Young Farmers had weekends away, like balls at state events and area events, and the same with the fire brigade. No, well, I suppose they were out at Staveley, so I don't know if they were lieutenants. They would have been involved, done what was asked of them, but I'm not. Jim was in Wycliffe area, wasn't he? But they would have done what was asked, but I'm not sure.
Can I just add one little bit on John's young farmers? It was quite a number of attended young farmers here. Well, it was Colin Holmes and John and many others. Most of the people that were involved in young farmers went on to be community leaders, presidents, secretaries of organisations. It was a great grounding for future, a future life in the community.
Oh, Graham McGuinness. I was not actually from Willaura, I was from Staveley, and I was born in 1935 in Glen Thompson, so I didn't have a lot to do with Willaura. When I grew up, I had a lot to do with Willaura. I can remember back, I reckon the fire brigade probably started here in about 1916, I think, when the town burnt. Is that right? I think it started after that. They got a fire brigade going, mostly walkers, and them were in it. And I can remember, and I think it was about 1939, they had great big bushfires down through Nareeb. And the old man went to the fire on Higgins' old Dodge ute or whatever they had, and they had a Furphy tank and a low-down pump, and actually about a knapsack nozzle on the end of it, so I don't know what the hell they did, but they all went anyway. Yeah, hand pump, yeah. We had one stationed at home on a ramp so we could load it onto something to put fires out. And I joined the fire brigade in here in 1956, I suppose, 5. And we ran for a few years with Frank, and John was too young. We had a lot of fun, a lot of success, didn't we? Yeah. Frank was dying for me to finish because he took my job. So when I knocked off, he took over. Should have kept going because it was a wonderful sport. I thought it was one of the best sports we ever played, and I've played football and tennis and things like that. Harry Lister and I, we had a lot of fun going to motorbike races, didn't we, Harry? Yeah. Yeah, well, Quinty Walker over here, he won the one-man ladder, and in the rural, he won the rope climb, all in the 1 year. And he's the only man ever did it. Because I think they knocked the rope climb off after that, didn't they? Yeah, so nobody could beat him. And he'll let you know that too if you ask him. I can remember back when I was a kid, we used to watch Walter's truck go past with the big semi, and we thought it was a really big truck. And Alec and Ted and Joe Hockley and them used to build a wheat stack out home, and I thought it was the biggest wheat stack in Victoria at one stage, but I don't know whether that's right or not. Can you remember? Yeah. And the school, I went to school there in Staveley. There was about 13 kids, I think, and they moved to school down from opposite Higgins Drive, about, 2 mile. Slipped it down on some logs so that we could get more kids to come to go to school, and that lasted till about 48, I think, and then it closed. There weren't enough children. That's about all. You don't want my family history, I don't think, do you? No. Right, so I won't give it to you.
Frank Byron. Just going back to the 40s and the 50s growing up, I thought some of the most interesting times we had at the Scout Hall down here. Ray Plunkett was our Scout Master, I suppose you call him in those days. And we used to do bob job weeks around the town, more than 1 week it was. That's to raise money for the Scouts and I suppose others, I'm not sure. Actually, I was too young to realise where the money went to. But two biggest frights I ever had in the town, the biggest belting I ever had, we used to have
drums on a ramp. We used to have drums and a ramp at the top dam up there. And we're up there one day, and it was Barry McDonald's father actually went past and saw us. And he turned round, I saw him turn round, come back. About 5 minutes later, my old man come up there, and did I get it? It was real belt on the backside. Yeah, that's right. So Barry, I always remember that. And the next biggest fright, remember we had a bootmaker up here. I think his name was McRae, if anyone knows. Yes, and he was epileptic, we'd call it that today, and took a turn while I was up there. And it's the quickest I've ever run home through everyone's yard, because he lived up here. Yeah, right, and I went straight through all the backyards and we lived next to the Methodist church at that stage, because we come into town, because I think the bus finished at your corner at that stage. So we come into town and lived next to the Methodist church for a lot of years. So, but that's the quickest I've ever run when I was a kid anyway. I got a hell of a fright. Just on John, there was 140 odd teams, 146 teams in our heyday in the Fire Brigade when Graham was running. And Graham was part of the, and myself, Tasmanian and Victorian champions in 1959. It was 140 odd competitors, and now there's, John would know, probably 20. So, well, why I say 146 is 146 small towns, big towns, and now you've only got the major towns surviving. Yes, well, I couldn't tell you about the other states. Oh yes, went to Western. I didn't go to West Australia, but no.
They used to send teams over.
Yes, they did so. Yes, and then the next biggest success was 1965. I think Graham was just out of it then. What they call the Champion Four. We won that, and Quentin Walker won the ladder, I think, in 1964. So, and talking about the bushfires, the tanks. As the fires Graham was talking about, they were 80-gallon galvanised round tanks, and they had low-down pumps on them. And I think Jeff's father and my father had one each. No, they were still there years later. That'll do me.
Just as far as that, the growing up part of it is great, sort of, because you could do most sort of things, as I said before. I don't know if our parents weren't sort of at school to pick us up after school. We'd walk gone 3 mile home until someone came along. So you felt quite safe on doing that, and sort of as far as sort of mixing, you always over the weekends you're able to mix with your cousins or your next door neighbours and sort of wander across the paddocks, and you'd have no sort of problem. Just things have changed, not just so much over the years. Keith, he was involved in it.
Barry McDonald. I was born in 1938. My mother was born here. In fact, in 1980, somewhere in 1980, the grandparents come from Ararat. Grandmother was a Bonner from Ararat, and the grandfather was from England. He was come out, and they got married, and they ended up coming down to Willaura and running the Willaura Hotel until 1900. So all my aunties and uncles, all been born in the Willaura Hotel, 8 of them. Then the hotel was, Gold Rush come in 1900, 1901, and my grandfather, being a silly old man, had never signed a lease with Mr. Wildman. Wildman owned the building, and when the gold rush started, there was trains coming here on the weekends, dropping 500 and 600 people off, and they'd all walk out to Mafeking. And so the old fella was told to leave because he hadn't signed a lease, and Wildman wanted to run the hotel himself for his own money. So anyway, he went down where Hoppy's shop is, the supermarket, and built the coffee palace. It had 36 rooms in it, and they ran the coffee palace there until 1934. If you're in the notes there, the first bank was in the lounge room of the Willaura Coffee Palace in 1900. And the old fellow, because he'd been in Ararat, he worked in a grocer's shop up there. I don't know, somewhere there's got a beehive on the top of the building, on the on the mascot out the front. Anyway, he'd been a grocer. He started selling goods to the people that come to go out to Mount William. And grandmother told me that most weekends they would fill a sugar bag with sixpences with what they sold of shovels, wheelbarrows, tea, coffee, etc. He ran that until he died in 1934. My father come to Willaura. His father was over, had a farm over behind Brebner's there in Buanga Way, and he come over here, and then he married my mother after he come back from the war. At the war, he had been injured. He was spent 6 months in hospital over in England. Then when he come back here to home, he was repatriated back in end of 1917, I think it was. He was in hospital in Caulfield in Melbourne. While he was recuperating, he went to the Working Men's College, which is now RMIT, and learnt to be a mechanic, come back home here and set up the business in 1919. So, and that stage he was in one of the shops next to the garage. Then in 1929, he built the garage on the vacant block. Then in 1949, we won a contract with school buses, and we ran the school buses from 1949 until I retired in 2006, so it was a fair while. The bus was a Bedford, a Q model Bedford, Q model Dodge, and it was the first laminated interior bus in Victoria. It was built by Grummet Brothers and that was after it was wrecked or it ran out of everything. It was the shop behind Max Dreer's chemist shop there for years. It sat on the ground. That's where he kept all his goodies. So I think, I don't know, that's about all I can think of at the moment. I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, we had a taxi. We had a taxi run, and we used to go around. Funny story to that is that I come home, I left school 16 and a half, come home 1954. People used to come off the train and say, you know, want a taxi, Alec, and off they go. This day we were very busy, and old fella come who wanted to go, Max Binns, who wanted to go out to Tura, and father said, I can't take you for a while, you know. And he said, but Barry's driven the car a lot, he'll drive you home. I was 16, so I drove him out to Tura, dropped him off, come back to the Parry-Alec corner, come around the corner, and just there near what they called, just up in the first paddock, there were some trees on the left, and a bit of a rise, and as I come over the rise, there was a bag of wheat in the middle of the road. And I was driving a 2-year-old Dodge Kingsway custom car, you know, fully imported. And I thought, this is how they do it in the pictures. So I swung out around it, but I forgot to take my foot off the accelerator. And I went right round, slid into the table drain, flew up in the air and landed on the roof post. And Bob Laidlaw was stripping just from here to you from me. And he nearly died of shock, and I crawled out through the passenger side window, and all I did was cut my arm on the barbed wire fence. So he took me back to the house, rang my father, and I can't tell you what he said. And Bob said, you better have a drink. and I never drank in those days. It'd be a shandy at the worst, and he poured this glass, and I went, oh, it was whiskey, and I couldn't talk or breathe for about 5 minutes. But when you're talking about Archie Parkinson never said a word about that. He knew about it, everyone knew about it. But when you turned the car up on its wheels, there was the imprint of the steering wheel was on the roof. It had come down that far. But no seat belt, I was on the floor. So I was led a charmed life. When power come to Willaura in 1938, he was, what they call him? I can't think what they call him. But anyone who had power out, he'd go out. And we had the long poles stuck out of the car, and often he'd take me to hold the torch while he put a fuse in someone's thing. And, and for God's sake, hold the torch still, Anyway, this night it was very windy, wet, raining, and we were called out to Halley Laidlaws at Tura. And we were out there and we had to put the fuse up and everything. And it was raining, so old Halley said to my father, good God, man, come inside and have a drink. So, of course, Dad never drank. He got drunk on shandies, but it was the same thing. Old Halley gave him a drink of whiskey, and of course he got rid of that, and he put it out, and, you better have another one if you have one. So he had two. On the way home, we started to go down the road, and I was about 8, 9, 10, and he said, you'll have to drive, son. So I sat on his knee, and I kept the car straight because he couldn't keep it on the road. He had his foot in the accelerator, but we went home pretty slow, but it was fun. Yeah. Anyway, I think you heard enough of me.
Yeah, Ron Jenkinson. I'm probably the ringing in the circle today. Not being born and bred here, but Marg and I came across from Coleraine in 1972, so I think I can probably reflect a little bit on what we found when we came here, and how it's been so good for us. We came across to Yarram Park. I took a job there to work on the stud cattle. In those days, there was about 24, 25 people that were employed out there, which was, I think, one of the bigger employers in the district at the time. And just to reflect on today's, I suppose, agricultural standards, I would think there's probably only 3 or 4 or 5 guys out there now doing a similar amount of work to what was done in that time. But coming into the district and into the town, we've had both of our children were born here at the Willaura Hospital with the good care of Dr. Hanscom. That it's coming, you come to a new start off in life as a married couple, but I can only say that the strength of the community here and the support that we got when we came, from everyone from the infant welfare nurse to the local doctors to the people in the street, they were so supportive, so good to us and made us feel so welcome. And I think that's something that the town still has in its own little way. I think it's a unique trait in lots of these little places. You don't see a lot when you drive into the town, but you get that feeling, that strong feeling of community that it's always been there, and it's been developed over the years, and by your forebears that we've been lucky enough to be the recipient of. And just to see how the town's, I suppose, grown, how it's come and how people have gone, but numbers have certainly dwindled. Yeah, just to continue on. Yeah, when we came to town, it was a real buzz. The town was always, a hive of activity. We came to, you'd come into Hoppies of a Friday night. They had the late night shopping, would you believe? Which I think I haven't heard mentioned before today. The street was always busy. You could never get into the pub unless you got in there early on a Friday night. The school was full of, it was a thriving community. There was 160 or 70 kids here when our boys went to the school here. And I can always remember it being a really safe place for kids to grow up and for kids to have the opportunity to explore and be kids. And if they got into trouble, they generally got a boot up the backside, or there was enough people in the community that would look out for your kids and try and keep them on the straight and narrow. And the opportunities that have been here for, for all of our kids, they've all gone on to do bigger and better things, and I think the strength of the community gives the kids a really good foundation to build a solid life on. And I think that certainly reflects very strongly here for what all of you people here have contributed to the town, the spirit of the community. But it's been great, and some of the things that Jesse reflected on about the dances here, it was a great way for us to get to know people. We could bring our kids in, and you wouldn't do it these days, but the kids used to have a camp in the car, and your mum and dad, and we'd come in, we'd go to the dance and have a good night out, and there'd be a string of cars out in out the front of the hall here with all the out-of-town kids asleep in the back or in the back seat or whatever, and through the night there'd be a string of parents out there checking on not only their own kids but everybody else's kids. But we're so lucky to have all the good infrastructure that's been built over the years by parents, families that have contributed to the district, and I'd like to think that the next generation that go through here, may they be few, but all strength to them that they can reap the benefits of what's been done for them, and just hope that they can appreciate it. But from an outsider's point of view, I couldn't see how you could come to a better place and want to make a life and raise a family in a good strong community in a very safe place.
Just talking of the community, as Ron was, it's 30 years last weekend since we had that centenary here, and at that time, with our research we did, at that stage, we counted up 37 different organisations that were in the town in its heyday. So it was a pretty strong community. Now, Ivan said he hasn't got much, but he did run the school buses from here, so you might have something on the buses.
Yeah, Graham Robinson again. I'm just listening to the comments, and it's all relative, really. When we were young and kicking around the town, we learned a lot of things. We taught ourselves a lot of things. Great place to grow up in. Some people have said, well, the next generation or two mightn't do it so easy, but it's relative to what they know. Progress has moved on. Everything's come a lot faster nowadays. Technology's moving more. They won't know any difference. All they'll be able to know about what we've done in the past is what we say today. They will be working in their world, their new world, and it's probably foreign to some of us, that technology and that's about. But that's what they'll grow up in, and we hope that they get it as right as what we did, I suppose. Respect, I think that was the main thing we had instilled to us when we were young, kicking around the town. We knew everybody in every house along the line. We knew who was a bit of a scoundrel and pinched a bit of wood from down the street. We knew who was good for a cold drink or an ice cream or a cup of tea when we were young. And you always made sure that you were hanging around someone's place when it was probably about time to get a drink or something like that. The kids nowadays, they're probably not game to hang around a house or whatever just because they don't know what's in there. So we were, as Ron said, lucky. I don't know whether we were lucky. I think it was the way the community was built around us at the time, and that respect was there. Now, a lot of that respect's been lost, and I don't suppose we're ever going to get it back again. But I was very lucky in as much as I spent a lot of time with my grandparents in the shop, mainly because it was a sort of a two-family business, and I saw a lot of great people come and go through the town. A lot of characters too, there's no doubt about that. I'm looking at one right now. Not you, Jeff. It was a great place to grow up in, and it will still be a great place to grow up in too, a bit, though it will have changed, but we've just got to learn to go along with the progress of what happens at the time.
I concur with everything that all the previous speakers have said about growing up in the town. I thought it was a wonderful place, and I'd just like to pass a personal thank you that it was nice to meet up with Sid Gillett. I spent, in actual fact, I spent 17 years secretary at the silo, and I spent 6 years closely working with Sid on the GEB in Melbourne, and one of our memorial trips was, we remarked, both of us today, was 1983, walking out of Collins Street at 6 o'clock and seeing that red dust and the fires, and we come home. Terrible trip it was, but that was more a personal note.
Chris Brain, born in 54, probably a little bit young for this group. Maybe, but you talk about mother coddling, and I'm thinking I was probably the first of the generation of the mother coddled children. We were picked up by a school bus right at our doorstep, and I do recall Frank Robbie got us to school for many a day, backwards and forwards, so that was mother coddling. It was down that halfway gully, I remember, swerving around, but Frank got us there time and time again. It may, in some respects, may have been born too early. My first experiences of trying to play football for Willaura was one couldn't get into the under-13s. There were that many boys. So if I was born 30 years later, one might have got into the under-13s. So in that regard, we went to Wycliffe to play football. And that's how it's all changed now, of course. And what's the other thing? I think it's just the change, more than anything, change. That's how we handle the change. And if I think a generation's gone by when you see the history and the atmosphere of people from 1876, it was growth, future, prosperity, family, everything was here. Now we're in a situation of decline, and the atmosphere is in the exact opposite to the previous 10 generations. And that's something we have to deal with and adjust to, like every rural village of today. But it's still a wonderful place. It might be in decline, but the quality is still here, and that's what we're trying to maintain. Thank you.
I also want to bring in to the conversation as we move around this way again. I think we'll just keep the mic moving around. I was thinking maybe I'd like to hear about the characters of the town, so the likes of, the doctors, the town leaders, the quiet achievers, and the battlers.
Yeah, Ivan McMillan. My first recollection in Willaura was in 1946. I was boarding down here with Ada Barnes. Some of you people would remember her. And Dad started the school bus off from Willaura, I think it was 46. Be about right, Barry? Can you remember? So, yes, over the years I've had a great association with all these gentlemen and their fathers. having the Holden dealership, and also we had Massey Ferguson in Willaura here for quite a few years, and we did steal a mechanic from these boys up here, Quinton Walker. He came across to manage Willaura for us, and yeah, so it's been very good to the family. Thank you.
Jeff Lardner again. Yeah, we had a bit of a character here in Bob Templeton. Used to dig at the hotel there a lot. Anyway, this night, two strangers came into the bar and just quietly had a few beers and looked around, and they were trying to know where they could put a bet on, because back in those days, it was illegal. They picked Bob out. Bob, is there anywhere around here we can put a bet on? Oh, yeah. Now, you just go up the street to such and such a thing. You just go, and of course, they were the police chasing SB bookmakers, so. And Graham's father, well, we all know Graham's father was a real character. I remember talking to Frank one day, Frank Robertson, and I said, how are you, mate? He said, had a bad night last night. He said, I went down to the pub. He said, I never drink whiskey, but this night I thought I'd have a few. He said, 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up pulling the blankets over. And he said, all that were coming over were fishing rods. He'd gone home and gone to sleep in the boat. And another one of his experiences was up at the waterworks up at the reservoir at Willaura. He took his grandson up fishing, and he was using a spinner, and he's casting out, and he said, this cast, there was no plop in the water. He looks round, and here's the grandson with the spinner stuck in the lobe of his ear. And of course, Better dropped him off up there, so he had to walk all the way down to the hospital with holding the fishing rod like a dog. Yeah, so there are a couple of the experiences I can. And also I remember one day I cut my hand open and I had to go up and get it stitched up. Dr. Kecky wasn't around, but Elaine Comboy, she was a nurse, and she said, well, I can stitch it for you, but I cannot deaden it. I said, well, what happened? She said, put your head down and grit your teeth. And she stitched it up for me, yeah. So there's some of the experiences I've had in this great little town.
One thing I forgot to say, an old bloke used to live over behind the sale yards. What was his name? Old Wallace Irvin. Lived in an old wagon over the back there. Anyway, I was only about 14, I think. And Laurie was in the pub, and I was in the pub with him, and old Wallace was in there having a drink. And Laurie said, Wallace, and old Wallace is over 80 by this time. He said, Wallace, he said, how old, he said, are you got to be before you can't have sex? Old Wallace piped up and said, I still get the feeling. But we used to milk cows, sell milk round here while Dad was at the war. We got into a lot of trouble. We used to go up and pinch all the fruit off the trees in the back lanes. And old Tim Healy locked me and Laurie in the jail and left us there for 4 hours. I forget what we done. We pinched something we shouldn't have. But no, I had a good life here, really. My brothers and they all grew up and left here, but Laurie stayed here, and then I come back and started up. But I had a lot of good times here. I had some bad times too, but that's life. I'm glad I was glad that I could come back today. I'm glad I moved out of here 8 years ago.
Yeah, John Walter again. Yeah, when you think of characters, I probably think of a recent one by the name of Jim Tutton, who was the local electrician. And he was just boisterous, full of noise type bloke. I can't really think of too many stories at the minute, but he was an absolute character. Yeah, another thing I forgot to say before was about the barber. Keith Gillespie used to cut our hair in a side room of his house next to our shed in Airy Street, just opposite the Catholic church there. So that was always a great old gossip session when you'd go to get your hair cut
Keith Gillespie's.
Yeah, and Jim Walter again. I was talking to Harry early on about Andy Jackson. When I heard that name, I thought I know something about him and motorbikes, and then Harry reminded me not only about jumping the gutter down here, but actually, Harry, you want to finish the story about Andy? Yeah. But killing himself? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Harry remembered him, and I then remembered myself, I think, that Andy actually killed himself on the bridge out at the Hopkins here, I think, by standing up on the seat of the motorbike, and when he went to put his foot down off it, he got it into the wheel or something, and yeah, that's right, and killed himself. So that's Andy. The other one we talked about, and again, Harry reminded me again of things I'd remembered about Buster Aldridge. Buster, of course, Buster was kind of the known about town as the fairly light-fingered character, I guess, and but everybody respected him still and overlooked his transgressions, I suppose, because they knew of his history. During the war, he'd actually saved the lives of at least a couple of other guys, including Clary Johns, by sneaking out of the Japanese prison camp and pinching chickens from the Japs and bring them back. And then I think he was injured himself, and quite a colourful story. It's a pity someone hasn't got it put together in detail, actually, because but so everybody knew Buster's history and kind of overlooked a lot of things that he might have done and got into strife for otherwise. He's probably one of the most colourful characters that I ever remembered much about. And my first fight was with his son. And I knew all about, the Marquess of Queensberry, how you shaped up and did all this sort of stuff. And he didn't know all that stuff, but he came at me with his arms flailing like a windmill, got me fair in the eye, and finished my career.
Yes, I was just going to bring up Buster Aldridge as well. Just elaborating on the war there, I think Clary Johns down at Wycliffe owes his life, he says to Clary, in Changi by going out and food. So, yeah, a great character and under-recognised, I think. Yeah. Look, I'm just going to drop down a few names of Elijah Luke has said, we should do this thing here today. We spoke of it, or people have spoken, we should have done this years ago, but there's a group of people, probably my parents, so I'll go back with you. We've got Jeff. All right, I'll hang you on. Oh, it's all right. Okay. We go back to, I'll just name a few. There's Orb McRae and Jeff's father, Huey Ford, Keith. Yeah, well, Keith, I was going to save him to last. A group of people there, John Higgins, Laurie Higgins. There was a group of those people that sort of, I respected those. We were young kids. We'd go into the pub. There was a big pub culture in those days for those people. Those people would always, those older ones would always come up and talk to us. We were only young kids, maybe even young teenagers. And they'd go out of the way, and we respected those. And the one in particular was Keith McGuinness, and he was affectionately known as Uncle Keith to quite a lot of us younger ones around. I hope Graham could just give us elaborate a little bit on what Keith's bit of Keith's history in the district, because I think he started working at Narrapumma as a young bloke, was it, Graham? So perhaps if at some stage you could probably elaborate a little bit on that, because he's I feel, one of the great characters, a well-respected person of the district.
Well, if I've got to talk about my father, Graham McGuinness. He was in everything that went. Mum died when she was 46, and he decided he wasn't going to have any more of that business, so he played the field, or didn't play the field, not the women, but he went to the pub every night. He was very loyal to Willaura and Wycliffe. I played football with Wycliffe, so he went down there on Thursday night, and Saturday he followed them. Every other night he came into Willaura, or he went out to Jack Gordon's for tea on a Sunday, and he was, Jack Gordon was another. Well, I think he was a bigger character than Dad, and Ron Spittle was too. I can tell a few stories about Ron Spittle, but if I'm allowed. Ron got a load of super one day, bagged super, and he was driving out and everybody's waving to him like this, and Ron waves back, and the dog had knocked the thing into gear, and he tipped her all off the back as he was going around the corner. The old man, he used to, well, I shouldn't talk about him, should I? He might be listening. He used to go home, quite often he got Ron Spittle's fence there one night. He used to drive through the fence in the Subaru and go up the gate and open it and ring him up next morning and tell him that he'd knocked the fence over. He did that about 3 times. What was it? Yeah. Was it? Yeah, well, he used to drink a little bit. But, I don't know who the other characters were. We had quite a few in town. I remember Les, when I was a kid, I used to idolise him. Actually, he used to go to school up at Higgins, and he'd fly down the road on the bike and skid around the corner up to his house there, and God, I used to think he was wonderful. But anyway, it changed my mind. Yeah, there was a group of used to come into the pub every night. They used to, when wool was a pound, they all got spoilt. It only lasted for 1 year, but they all thought they were millionaires, I think, and they used to knock off at 5 o'clock into town, leave us kids home working. That was their life, and the pub did very well out of them. Anyway, I think I'll hand over.
Before the ladies do turn up. It was mentioned there earlier, I think Collie Holmes, or about the Chinamen. They had a garden up here at the end of the town. And every morning, the Chinaman used to come to my mother's with a paddle across the top and 2 buckets, and there'd be a knock at the door, and I'd go to the door and he'd say, "Pissy missy, pissy missy," and she'd bring out there goes under from under the bed and tip it in his bucket. And that went on every morning. He would walk down from up the other side of the thing, and he must have had a whole line of ladies or people around the town that he put on all the garden. And I'd go there in this little pissy missy. And Mum.
I could perhaps contribute a little bit to my first encounter with Dr. Kecky, being a new chum to the district and not knowing much about the capacity or the capability of the doctors that were in the town. One Saturday afternoon, playing football here for Willaura, I got the proverbial whack in the ear and split my ear open. So I was taken off the field and they said, "You better go over and get it stitched." So I went, I was taken to the hospital and I was introduced to a very ageing Dr. Kecky, and I put my hand out to shake his hand to say hello because I'd never met him before. And I was greeted with a very, as you'd all know, a very wavy hand. He had I'd call it a severe tremor of some sort. And I didn't know whether I was going to get my ear stitched up or the ear stitched to my head or where it was going to finish up. But I must say that as soon as he got into gear, as soon as the job was to be done, he was able to regain his steadiness, and he did a brilliant job. So, yeah, good story, good doctor.
Terry cut his knee open there one time. He fell on a rock and took him in, and they put about 10 stitches in it, and anyway it broke open again, so I took him back in, and Dr. Kecky got the needle and he's trying to get it through and it wouldn't go through, so he tried another needle and he had about 3 needles, and anyway eventually he got one and he handed it back to Elaine and said, "We'll have to keep this one, nurse."